Ethan's hand struck my cheek beside the picnic table, and the paper plate in my hand hit the grass. His mother snatched my phone before I could reach it, saying I had embarrassed the Carter family long enough. My phone, my foundation access code, and the sealed broadcast confirmation were now in Margaret Carter's hand. Inside the house, the living room television still waited on the national news channel for the education grant announcement. One swipe from that phone could release 600 scholarship awards to schools across 3 states. The backyard went silent. Smoke from the grill drifted between us. A plastic cup rolled under a folding chair. Someone's baby started crying near the patio door. Ethan looked at me like he had restored order. That was his first mistake. He had not taken a phone. He had taken the key to a door none of them knew existed. The July heat pressed against my skin. Lemonade sweated in pitchers on the buffet table. Children stood frozen near the bounce house. Uncles looked down at their shoes. Cousins pretended to adjust plates that were already full. Nobody moved toward me. Not one person. I touched my cheek with 2 fingers. The sting spread hot under my skin. I kept my eyes on Ethan. He was breathing hard, but his voice stayed low enough to sound controlled. That made it worse. "You do not talk back to my mother in this house," he said. Margaret stood beside him in a floral dress, my phone held tightly against her chest. Her pearl bracelet clicked softly when she moved. "Some people marry into a family and forget their place," she said. A few relatives looked away. One laughed under his breath, then stopped when nobody joined him. The laugh stayed in the air anyway. Small. Ugly. Unfinished. I looked toward the house. Through the screen door, I could see the television glowing blue in the living room. A news anchor smiled silently while graphics moved along the bottom of the screen. The program was early. They were filling time. My segment had not started yet. I had spent 6 months keeping it quiet. Not because I was ashamed. Because the scholarship announcement belonged to the students first. Their names. Their schools. Their futures. I am Jasmine Carter. At least, that was the name this family used when they wanted me small. On grant documents, press releases, and foundation records, my name carried farther than this backyard. But nobody here cared to ask what I did. Ethan once told his cousin I worked with kids or something. Margaret once called my job charity paperwork. I let them. Not because it did not hurt. Because some rooms punish dignity when it speaks too soon. A phone camera rose near the fence. My niece, Kayla, stood half-hidden behind a cooler, recording with both hands. Her eyes were wide. She looked scared. I shook my head once, just enough for her to see. She lowered the phone slightly, but not all the way. Margaret noticed. "Put that away," she snapped. Kayla froze. Ethan turned toward her. "This is family business." The words made the silence colder. Family business. As if humiliation became private just because relatives watched it happen. I straightened slowly. Grass clung to the edge of my dress where the plate had fallen. Barbecue sauce stained the white paper napkin near my shoes. My purse sat on a patio chair, still zipped, still holding the invitation letter from the National Education Forum. Margaret kept my phone. Ethan kept the whole yard watching. "Give it back," I said. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. Margaret smiled. "You can have it when you leave." The television inside grew louder suddenly. Someone must have raised the volume. The anchor's voice drifted through the screen door, bright and clear. A national education announcement was coming after the break. Ethan looked toward the house for half a second. Then back at me. He still did not understand. The grill hissed behind him, and the screen door creaked open. The screen door opened slowly, and my cousin Linda stepped onto the patio carrying a bowl of potato salad. She stopped the moment she saw the faces around the yard. Nobody reached for the food. Nobody spoke. The bowl remained in her hands. "What happened?" she asked. Margaret answered before anyone else could. "Nothing that concerns you." Linda looked at me. Then at Ethan. Then at my phone still trapped in Margaret's grip. Her expression changed. Not much. Just enough. The anchor's voice floated out from the living room television again. 30 minutes until the special announcement. My stomach tightened. Not from fear. From timing. Everything suddenly seemed connected to a clock nobody else could see. Ethan stepped closer. Take your purse and leave. The smell of charcoal drifted across the yard. Somewhere behind the house, a lawn sprinkler clicked rhythmically. Normal summer sounds. They made the moment feel even stranger. I looked at Ethan for a long second. Give me my phone first. He laughed softly. A few relatives joined him. The sound died quickly. Nobody seemed comfortable holding it. Margaret folded her arms. You will get it after you apologize. A child dropped a red plastic cup near the picnic table. The cup rolled through the grass until it stopped against my shoe. Tiny things kept drawing my attention. Maybe because nobody wanted to look directly at the real problem. Kayla still stood near the cooler. Her phone remained pointed downward. Not off. Just lowered. She was recording more than anyone realized. A mini hook tugged at the edge of my thoughts. The future often arrived through small lenses. Ethan pointed toward the gate. You heard my mother. The gate. The word almost made me smile. For years they assumed they controlled every door in every room. They never wondered who opened opportunities for thousands of students every year. They never asked? The television volume rose again. Someone inside must have turned it higher. A commercial ended. Applause echoed faintly from the speakers. Several relatives glanced toward the house. Only for a second. Then back to the drama in the yard. Margaret noticed. She tightened her hold on my phone. Her thumb brushed the screen. The device lit up. For the first time, her confidence flickered. A notification covered the lock screen. Another appeared. Then another. The phone vibrated repeatedly in her hand. Buzz. 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 She frowned. Why is this thing going crazy? My heartbeat slowed instead of speeding up. That surprised me. Across the yard, Uncle Robert leaned forward in his lawn chair. Maybe somebody is trying to reach her. Margaret pressed the side button. The screen went dark. The vibration stopped. Silence settled again. Temporary silence. Ethan took a deep breath. This ends now. He looked around the yard, expecting agreement. Instead, he found lowered eyes. People were beginning to notice details. My phone. The notifications. My refusal to panic. Small cracks were forming in the story they believed. Linda set the bowl down on the table. Maybe everybody should calm down. Margaret turned sharply. Stay out of it. Another notification sound came from my purse this time. A different device. A backup phone. Hidden inside a zippered compartment. Nobody else knew it was there. My eyes shifted toward the chair for half a second. Ethan followed my gaze. So did Margaret. Neither understood what they had just seen. Yet. The television audience inside the house suddenly erupted into applause. Then someone called my name from the living room. Someone called my name from the living room, and every head in the backyard turned toward the house. The voice belonged to my cousin Nathan. He stood just inside the screen door, one hand still holding a television remote. His face looked pale. Jasmine, he said again. You need to see this. Margaret rolled her eyes. Nobody needs to see anything. Nathan did not look at her. He kept looking at me. That caught my attention. Nathan usually avoided conflict. Always had. If he was speaking now, something had changed. The television audience applauded again. The sound drifted through the doorway like a warning bell. Ethan took a step toward Nathan. We are busy. Nathan swallowed. No. You are going to want to see this. A small silence followed. The kind that arrives before people make a decision they do not understand yet. The sprinkler behind the fence clicked again. Water arced across the neighboring lawn. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked twice. Ordinary sounds. Yet every person in that yard seemed frozen between two moments. Margaret still held my phone. Ethan still expected control. But the room inside the house was beginning to pull everyone's attention away from him. Another vibration rattled through my phone in Margaret's hand. Buzz. 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 This time she looked down immediately. Her confidence slipped another inch. Who keeps calling her? She asked. Nobody answered. Because nobody knew. My backup phone vibrated again inside my purse. A soft sound. Almost hidden. But Ethan heard it. His eyes shifted toward the chair. What is in there? He asked. My purse, I said calmly. You know that. He frowned. Not because of my answer. Because of my tone. People expecting panic often become uncomfortable when they find calm instead. Nathan pushed the screen door open wider. The hinges squeaked. Seriously, he said. Come inside. Behind him, the television screen flashed bright blue and gold graphics. I could not see the words from where I stood. Only the colors. Only the movement. The program was getting closer. Margaret finally started walking toward the house. Curiosity defeated certainty. It usually does. Several relatives followed her. Then more. Folding chairs scraped against concrete. Drinks were abandoned on tables. Half-eaten burgers sat forgotten on paper plates. The family reunion began moving toward the living room like water finding a lower place. Ethan hesitated. He looked at me. Then at the house. Then back at me again. He wanted to finish the argument. But he wanted answers more. That was obvious now. I picked up my purse from the patio chair. The invitation letter remained safely inside. So did the backup phone. The screen glowed through the fabric for a second before going dark again. Another message waiting. Another clock ticking. Linda stepped beside me. Quietly. Are you okay? She asked. I looked at her. She was the first person all afternoon to ask. Not judge. Not accuse. Ask. I will be, I said. She nodded once. No speech. No lecture. Just understanding. Sometimes that is enough. Inside the house, voices started overlapping. Confused voices. Curious voices. Then they stopped almost all at once. That sudden silence felt heavier than any shouting could have. Ethan heard it too. His shoulders tightened. Margaret appeared in the doorway again. Her face looked different now. Not frightened. Not yet. But uncertain. Deeply uncertain. She glanced at me. Then at the phone in her hand. Then back toward the television. For the first time all afternoon, she seemed unsure whether she should still be holding it. The anchor's voice grew louder. Clearer. Closer. In just moments, he announced, we will introduce one of the nation's most influential education leaders. Nobody in the yard moved. Then a photograph appeared on the screen. The photograph appeared on the television screen, and every person in the living room leaned forward at the same time. From the backyard, I could only see part of it through the doorway. A shoulder. A microphone. A stage light. Not enough to identify anyone. Yet the reaction inside the house changed immediately. Confused voices replaced casual conversation. Someone asked the television to be turned up louder. Someone else asked who the woman on the screen was. The anchor continued speaking. His voice carried clearly through the room. For nearly a decade, this leader has transformed educational opportunities across America. Ethan moved toward the doorway. Fast. Not running. Just faster than before. Curiosity had replaced anger. Margaret followed him. So did nearly everyone else. The reunion was no longer happening in the backyard. It was happening around that television. I stayed where I was for a moment. The evening air felt warmer now. The smell of barbecue lingered over the grass. The bounce house still swayed gently in the distance. A paper napkin drifted across the patio. Strange how ordinary objects remain ordinary while lives begin to shift. Linda stood beside me. You already know what this is, do you not? She asked quietly. I looked toward the house. Maybe. She studied my face. That is not a normal answer. A faint smile touched my lips. Not because anything was funny. Because she was right. Another burst of applause erupted from the television audience. The sound rolled through the screen door and across the yard. Nathan appeared again. This time he looked directly at me. You should come inside. His voice carried a different weight now. Not urgency. Respect. Small. Careful. But real. I picked up my purse and walked toward the house. The wooden deck creaked beneath my shoes. Every step seemed louder than usual. Inside, the living room was packed. Relatives stood shoulder to shoulder. Some sat on armrests. Others remained frozen near the hallway. Nobody noticed me enter. They were all staring at the screen. The television showed clips from schools. Children reading books. Teachers standing in renovated classrooms. Smiling families. New computer labs. Scholarship ceremonies. Then another photograph appeared. This one stayed on the screen longer. A few people exchanged uncertain glances. Ethan narrowed his eyes. He seemed to recognize something but could not place it. Margaret still held my phone. Though now she looked more concerned about the television than the device in her hand. Uncle Robert pointed toward the screen. Have we seen her before? Nobody answered. The anchor continued. Her foundation has funded programs in hundreds of communities. A younger cousin grabbed his own phone and started searching online. Another followed. Then another. Tiny screens began lighting up around the room. A new kind of silence settled over the house. Not the silence of conflict. The silence of discovery. Ethan finally noticed me standing near the doorway. His gaze shifted from the television to my face. Then back again. Something was beginning to connect. Not fully. Just enough. A notification suddenly appeared on one cousin's phone. Then another. Then another. Heads lowered. Fingers moved. Eyes widened. The room felt smaller. The air felt thinner. Margaret looked down at my phone once more. The lock screen continued filling with notifications. Interviews. Messages. Invitations. Headlines. She swallowed hard. The confidence she carried all afternoon was fading. The anchor smiled at the camera. After the break, we will reveal this year's National Education Impact Award recipient. Nobody in the Carter family moved. Then Ethan saw the name printed beneath the photograph. His eyes locked on the screen. The color drained from his face little by little. He blinked once. Then again. As if the television might correct itself. It did not. The photograph remained. The name remained. Around him. Several relatives pulled out their phones and started searching faster. Fingers moved across screens. Search results appeared. One cousin whispered something under his breath. Another shook his head. Nobody was laughing now. The living room felt smaller with every passing second. The anchor moved into a commercial break. Bright music filled the room. Nobody paid attention to it. Ethan turned toward me. Jasmine. It was the first time all afternoon he had said my name without anger attached to it. I said nothing. Margaret still held my phone. Yet her grip had changed. Earlier it looked possessive. Now it looked uncertain. Like she was holding something fragile. Uncle Robert stared down at his screen. This cannot be right. A younger cousin answered immediately. It is right. He turned his phone around. There are hundreds of articles. Nobody responded. The silence returned. Not empty silence. Heavy silence. The kind that forces people to rethink old assumptions. I stood near the doorway and watched them discover a version of me they had never bothered to learn. Outside, the late afternoon sun pushed long shadows across the backyard. The bounce house still moved gently in the wind. Children continued playing, unaware that the adults inside were watching their realities shift. Another notification appeared on my phone. Then another. Margaret finally looked directly at me. "Why did you never tell us?" she asked. Her voice sounded smaller than before. I met her eyes. "Nobody asked?" That answer landed harder than any argument could have. Several relatives lowered their heads. They remembered. The jokes. The dismissive comments. The assumptions. The times they talked around me instead of to me. Ethan looked toward the television again. The commercial break was ending. The network logo faded. Applause echoed through the speakers. My heartbeat remained steady. I had known this moment was coming for months. Yet standing inside this room felt different than imagining it. Nathan moved closer to the screen. "It is starting again." Every face turned forward. The anchor smiled. "Tonight we celebrate leadership, service, and opportunity." Images flashed across the screen. Schools. Graduates. Teachers. Scholarship recipients. Then a familiar building appeared. One I recognized instantly. Several students stood outside holding acceptance letters. I remembered each of their stories. One had become the first college student in his family. Another had overcome homelessness. Another had survived years of instability before earning a scholarship. The room watched quietly. Nobody spoke over the television anymore. That alone felt strange. The anchor continued. "This year's recipient helped create educational opportunities for thousands of students nationwide." Ethan swallowed hard. His hands hung awkwardly at his sides. He looked like a man standing in a place he no longer understood. A mini hook lingered in the room. They knew the name now. But they still did not know the full story. The camera cut to a live audience in Washington, D.C. Rows of guests filled the ballroom. Bright lights reflected off crystal chandeliers. Then the anchor smiled again. "And in just a few moments, we will be speaking directly with tonight's honoree." Several relatives exchanged nervous glances. Margaret looked down at my phone once more. The screen lit up again. This time she read the caller identification. Her eyes widened. Slowly, almost carefully, she walked across the room and handed the phone back to me. The caller name was someone Ethan would recognize immediately. Then the phone started ringing again. The phone started ringing again, and nobody in the room looked away from it. The sound seemed louder than it should have been. Sharp. Clear. Impossible to ignore. Margaret had already returned it to my hand. She took 2 steps back afterward, as if the device belonged to a different world now. I glanced at the caller identification. The same name remained on the screen. The executive producer of the national broadcast. Right on schedule. Around me, several relatives noticed it too. One cousin quietly inhaled through his teeth. Another lowered his phone and stared. Ethan recognized the name immediately. I saw it in his eyes. He had seen the network credits appear on television for years. He knew exactly who was calling. The room remained silent. Even. The children near the hallway stopped talking. The television continued playing footage from schools across the country. Smiling students. Graduation caps. Scholarship ceremonies. Lives moving forward. Lives changing. I accepted the call. "Hello, Rebecca." My voice stayed calm. Professional. Familiar. Rebecca sounded relieved. "Jasmine, thank goodness. We were trying to reach you. We go live very soon." Several relatives exchanged glances. Nobody expected the conversation to sound so ordinary. Rebecca continued. "The president of the foundation board is already seated. The audience is ready. We just need final confirmation." I walked a few steps away from the crowd toward the front window. The evening sunlight filtered through the curtains. Dust floated in the golden light. Behind me, nobody dared interrupt. "Everything is confirmed," I said. "I will be ready." Rebecca laughed softly. "You always are." The call ended. I lowered the phone. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. Ethan opened his mouth. then closed it. He looked like a man trying to solve a puzzle while new pieces kept appearing faster than he could understand them. Uncle Robert finally spoke. "Foundation board?" Nobody answered. Another cousin searched online again. His eyes widened. Then widened further. "This says the foundation manages hundreds of millions of dollars." Several heads turned toward him instantly. Margaret looked at me. Not with anger anymore. With disbelief. Pure disbelief. She sat down slowly on the edge of a sofa cushion. The television audience applauded again. Bright stage lights flashed across the screen. The broadcast was moving closer to the reveal. I slipped my phone into my purse. The backup device inside vibrated once more. A new message. I checked it briefly. Security confirmation. Transportation confirmation. Event schedule confirmation. Everything was moving exactly as planned. Everything except this family reunion. Linda noticed the message preview. Her eyes lifted toward me. "You knew this was happening today." It was not an accusation. Just a realization. I nodded. "Yes." Ethan looked stunned. "Today?" I met his gaze. "The date was never a secret." He searched his memory. I could see it happening. Missed conversations. Ignored comments. Invitations left unopened on kitchen counters. Details dismissed because they came from me. The truth often arrives that way. Not suddenly. Gradually. Through dozens of moments people chose not to notice. A mini hook lingered in the room. They were learning facts. But they still did not understand the full picture. The anchor returned to the screen. The audience in Washington stood and applauded. The camera swept across hundreds of guests dressed in formal evening attire. Crystal chandeliers reflected light across the ballroom ceiling. Then the host smiled directly into the camera. "In just a moment, we will welcome tonight's honoree live." Nobody in the Carter family moved. Nobody checked a phone. Nobody reached for food. The entire room stared at the television. Then a production assistant appeared behind the host carrying a sealed card. The production assistant handed the sealed card to the host, and the applause inside the Washington ballroom slowly faded. In the Carter family living room, nobody breathed very loudly. Nobody shifted in their seat. Even the children sensed something important was happening. The television glow reflected across faces that looked completely different than they had an hour earlier. Ethan stood near the fireplace. His arms hung loosely at his sides. The confidence that filled the backyard was gone. In its place sat uncertainty. The host held the card for a moment, building anticipation. The audience laughed softly at a joke. The room in Washington looked elegant and bright. Crystal lights shimmered above hundreds of guests. Then the host opened the envelope. Paper crackled through the microphone. Every eye in the Carter house locked onto the screen. "Tonight's National Education Impact Award recipient," the host said, "has spent years transforming opportunities for students who were often overlooked." A photograph appeared again. Larger this time. Clearer. Several relatives leaned forward. Nobody needed to ask questions anymore. They recognized the face. They recognized the smile. They recognized the woman standing only a few feet away from them. Ethan lowered his head briefly, then looked back up, as if hoping the image would somehow change. It did not. Uncle Robert rubbed his forehead. Linda folded her arms quietly. Nathan remained standing beside the television. Nobody spoke. The host continued. "Her foundation has supported thousands of scholarships, funded educational initiatives in hundreds of communities, and helped students pursue futures that once seemed impossible." More images appeared. Students receiving awards. Teachers speaking at ceremonies. Families celebrating graduation days. Every image carried the same name. My name. A younger cousin slowly sat down on the floor. "Oh my God!" he whispered. The words barely reached the room. Yet everyone heard them. Margaret stared at the screen without blinking. Her eyes moved between the television and me. Television. Me. Television. Me. She seemed unable to connect the two versions into one person. The anchor smiled again. Many people know her work. Fewer people know how quietly she chose to do it. That line hit the room differently. Because it was true. I never hid who I was. I simply stopped forcing information into rooms that never wanted to hear it. Another notification sounded from someone's phone. Then another. Headlines continued spreading online. Several relatives glanced down briefly before returning their attention to the television. The story was growing larger by the minute. Ethan finally took a step toward me. Then stopped halfway. He looked unsure whether he even had the right to continue walking. That hesitation said more than any apology could. A mini hook settled over the room. They knew my name. They knew my work. Yet something even bigger was still coming. The host turned toward a giant screen behind the stage. Unfortunately, she could not attend in person tonight. Several people in the living room relaxed slightly. The reveal felt complete. The tension should have eased. But it did not. The host smiled wider. However, we are honored to welcome her live from a private location. The audience applauded instantly. My phone vibrated inside my purse. Once. Then twice. Then again. I already knew what the message would say. The production team was ready. The live connection was about to begin. Around me, nobody understood that yet. They still believed the biggest surprise had already happened. Then the television camera cut to a blank remote interview screen. The remote interview screen remained blank for 3 long seconds. Nobody in the living room moved. Nobody spoke. The television audience waited. The Carter family waited. Even the children seemed caught inside the silence. Then my phone vibrated again. The production team was checking the connection. Right on schedule. I slipped the phone from my purse and glanced at the message. Ready when you are. The words were simple. Yet they carried the weight of months of preparation. Across the room, Ethan watched every movement. His eyes followed the phone. Followed my expression. Followed the calm he had never bothered to understand. The host stood center stage beneath bright lights. Behind him, the giant screen still showed the network logo. The audience smiled politely, unaware of the tension unfolding hundreds of miles away inside a crowded family living room. Margaret sat rigid on the sofa. Her hands remained folded together. Earlier those hands had held my phone like a punishment. Now they looked uncertain. Small. Human. Uncle Robert cleared his throat. Nobody acknowledged the sound. Nathan stood beside the television, unable to look away. Linda remained near me. Quiet. Steady. Supportive without needing words. Another message arrived. 30 seconds. I locked the screen and returned the phone to my purse. Ethan noticed. You knew they were calling you, he said softly. The accusation was gone. The anger was gone. Only confusion remained. I looked at him. Yes. He swallowed hard. Why did you never tell me? The question hung in the air. Several relatives glanced between us. Waiting. Listening. I answered honestly. You stopped asking a long time ago. Nobody challenged the response. Because nobody could. The television audience applauded suddenly. The giant screen behind the host flickered once. Then again. A technician appeared briefly at the edge of the stage before disappearing. The connection was coming online. Every person in the room leaned forward. Tiny movements. Tiny breaths. Tiny shifts. Yet together they changed the atmosphere completely. The host smiled toward the camera. We are ready to welcome tonight's honoree. The ballroom erupted into applause. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above hundreds of guests. Camera flashes lit the room. Then the giant screen brightened. A silhouette appeared. Only an outline at first. Nothing more. Several Carter relatives immediately looked toward me. Then back at the screen. Then back at me again. The realization was spreading through the room in slow waves. Ethan lowered himself into a chair without seeming to notice. His eyes never left the television. A mini-hook settled over everyone present. They already knew who I was. But they had not yet seen the final connection happen in real time. The screen sharpened slightly. The silhouette became clearer. The audience applauded louder. The host laughed. There she is. Several people in the living room inhaled sharply. Margaret covered her mouth with one hand. The image was still not fully focused, but it was enough. More than enough. A younger cousin dropped his phone onto the carpet. Nobody picked it up. Nobody even looked down. The television camera zoomed closer. The connection stabilized. My office appeared behind me on the giant screen. Bookshelves. Awards. Foundation photographs. Student letters framed on the wall. The audience applauded again. Ethan stared at the image. Then slowly turned his head toward the real me standing only a few feet away. His expression changed completely. Not shock anymore. Not confusion. Recognition. For the first time in years, he was actually seeing me. Then the host asked the first question. And the entire Carter family seemed to lean closer to the television at the same moment. The ballroom lights reflected across the giant screen behind him. Applause slowly faded. Then silence settled over hundreds of guests waiting for my answer. What inspired you to dedicate your life to educational opportunity? The host asked. The camera focused on the interview feed. On the screen, I sat in my office surrounded by books, student letters, and framed photographs. In the living room, I stood only a few feet away from the television. The contrast felt almost unreal. Nobody looked at me directly now. They looked at the screen version first. Then at the real one. As if they were trying to understand how both could exist at once. My voice came through the speakers. Calm. Clear. Familiar. I grew up believing that opportunity changes everything. I said. Sometimes people only need one person to believe in them. The audience applauded softly. Several Carter relatives lowered their eyes. The words landed differently in that room. Ethan sat motionless. His elbows rested on his knees. His hands were clasped together tightly. He listened more carefully than I had ever seen before. The host smiled. Your foundation has helped thousands of students. Yet many people say you avoid attention whenever possible. Why? A small laugh came from the interview feed. Because the students are the story, I answered. Recognition should never become the mission. More applause followed. Nathan shook his head slowly. Not in disagreement. In disbelief. Linda glanced toward me with quiet understanding. Uncle Robert stared at the carpet for several seconds before looking back up. The room felt heavier with every answer. Another mini-hook quietly emerged. The audience knew my accomplishments now. But the most important truth still had not surfaced. The host continued. Many successful leaders talk about mentors. Was there someone who encouraged you when things became difficult? The question lingered for a moment. On the television screen, I smiled gently. Not a performance. A memory. There were a few, I said. But some of the most important lessons came from people who underestimated me. The audience laughed lightly. Then applauded again. Inside the living room, nobody laughed. Nobody even smiled. The sentence landed like a mirror. Ethan looked down immediately. Margaret shifted uncomfortably on the sofa. A younger cousin rubbed the back of his neck. Everyone heard the same words. Everyone understood them differently. The host nodded thoughtfully. That sounds like a powerful lesson. It was, I replied. When people decide who you are without asking, they reveal more about themselves than about you. Complete silence followed inside the Carter house. The television audience applauded. The ballroom guests stood briefly. Yet inside the living room, nobody moved. The contrast felt impossible to ignore. Outside, the sun had nearly disappeared. Evening shadows stretched across the backyard. Through the front window, the last golden light touched the floor near the doorway. My phone vibrated once inside my purse. Another message from the production team. Everything was proceeding perfectly. Ethan finally lifted his head. His eyes looked different now. The certainty was gone. The defensiveness was gone. For the first time all day, regret had begun to appear. Not dramatic regret. Not performative regret. Quiet regret. The kind people cannot hide. The host smiled toward the camera once more. One final question before we present the award. The audience applauded eagerly. The ballroom brightened. Camera operators moved into position. Then the host glanced down at a note card and read a sentence that made the entire room freeze again. The sentence on the note card made the entire room freeze again. The host looked directly into the camera and smiled. Before we present this award, there is something our audience should know. The ballroom grew quiet. Hundreds of guests waited. Inside the Carter house, nobody shifted in their seat. Nobody reached for a phone. Nobody even looked away. The host continued. This year's recipient personally funded emergency scholarship programs after natural disasters, economic crises, and school closures across the country. A series of photographs appeared behind him. Families standing beside temporary learning centers. Students receiving laptops. Teachers hugging children. Community leaders shaking hands. The images moved slowly across the giant screen. Each carried the same foundation logo. Each carried the same name. Uncle Robert lowered his eyes. Linda folded her hands together. Nathan stared at the television without blinking. The room felt smaller than ever. The host looked toward the interview screen again. Many people know the results of your work, he said. Very few know how much of it was done quietly. On the television, I smiled gently. The students never needed my name. They needed opportunities. The audience applauded immediately. The sound filled the living room. Yet nobody inside the house joined in. The applause felt like it belonged to another world. Ethan sat completely still. His shoulders had slumped. His jaw remained tight. Earlier that afternoon he wanted control. Now he seemed overwhelmed by understanding. That change was impossible to miss. Margaret looked down at her hands. For the first time all day, she appeared older. Not physically. Emotionally. Like years of assumptions had suddenly become visible to her. The host nodded. One of our board members told me something remarkable. He glanced back at the note card. He said the recipient turned down multiple opportunities for personal recognition because she wanted the spotlight focused on the students instead. More applause followed. A few guests in the ballroom even stood. Inside the Carter house, silence deepened. A younger cousin quietly wiped his eyes. Another stared at the floor. Nobody seemed comfortable with their own memories anymore. The television camera moved closer to the interview screen. The host smiled warmly. What keeps you motivated after all these years? The answer came without hesitation. People deserve to be seen for who they are, not for what others assume about them. The room stopped breathing. Not literally, but close enough. Ethan closed his eyes for a brief second. Margaret looked away. Several relatives exchanged uneasy glances. The sentence landed exactly where it needed to. Not as revenge. Not as an accusation. As truth. A mini hook lingered beneath the silence. The award ceremony was almost over. Yet the real emotional weight had only begun. Outside, darkness settled over the neighborhood. The backyard lights switched on automatically. Soft yellow light glowed through the windows. The family reunion decorations still hung from the fence. Paper streamers moved gently in the evening breeze. Life outside continued normally. Inside, nothing felt normal anymore. The host looked down once more, then smiled broadly. It is my honor to officially present the National Education Impact Award. The ballroom erupted into applause. Guests rose to their feet. Camera flashes filled the screen. The standing ovation continued for several seconds. Then the host raised one hand. The crowd slowly settled. He looked toward the interview screen again. There is one final surprise. Several Carter relatives lifted their heads. Ethan looked up immediately. Margaret frowned slightly. The host's smile widened. Tonight, we asked several scholarship recipients to record messages for you. Then the first student appeared on the screen. The first student appeared on the screen, and the ballroom audience immediately applauded. She looked about 19 years old. A college campus stretched behind her. Autumn leaves moved gently in the wind. She smiled nervously at the camera. Miss Carter, she said, I am the first person in my family to attend college. Her voice trembled slightly. That happened because you believed in me when nobody else did. The living room fell silent again. Not the silence of shock this time. The silence of reflection. The student continued speaking. You never asked for recognition. You never asked for anything back. You just helped. Her message ended. Another student appeared. Then another. Then another. Each carried a different story. Different cities. Different schools. Different lives. Yet the same gratitude. One young man stood inside an engineering lab. Another sat in a medical school library. A young woman spoke from a classroom where she now worked as a teacher. Their voices blended into something larger than individual success stories. They became evidence. Evidence of years nobody in this room had cared enough to understand. Ethan stared at the screen without blinking. The messages continued. One student described sleeping in a car before receiving a scholarship. Another talked about losing everything during a natural disaster. Another spoke about overcoming impossible odds. Every story led back to the same person. Every story led back to me. The television audience applauded after each message. Inside the Carter house, nobody moved. Nathan slowly sat down. Linda wiped at the corner of one eye. Uncle Robert folded his hands together and stared at the floor. Margaret remained motionless. Her shoulders looked smaller now. Earlier she spoke with certainty. Now she seemed trapped inside memories she could not escape. The final student appeared. He stood outside a university science building. Evening sunlight glowed behind him. People think changing the world requires attention, he said. But sometimes it starts with one person choosing kindness when nobody is watching. He smiled. Thank you for choosing kindness. The video ended. The ballroom audience rose to its feet again. Applause thundered through the speakers. The standing ovation lasted longer this time. Much longer. The host waited patiently for the crowd to settle. Then he looked toward the interview screen. What would you like to say to the students who shared those messages? The television version of me smiled softly. For a moment I said nothing. Just listened to the applause. Just looked at the students. Then my answer came. I would tell them the same thing I tell every student. The ballroom grew quiet. The Carter family listened. Do not let someone else's limited view of you become your own. Complete silence followed. The words seemed to settle over every person in the room. Ethan lowered his head immediately. Margaret closed her eyes. Nobody needed the message explained. They understood exactly where it belonged. Outside, the neighborhood lights glowed softly beyond the windows. The family reunion decorations still hung in the backyard. They looked forgotten now. Meaningless compared to what was unfolding inside. A mini hook remained beneath the emotion. The public celebration was ending. The private consequences were only beginning. The host thanked the audience and prepared to close the interview. Camera operators shifted positions. Stage lights softened. The event was reaching its final moments. Ethan finally looked up at me. His eyes were full of something I had not seen before. Not confusion. Not embarrassment. Regret. Real regret. The kind that arrives too late to prevent damage. Then the broadcast came to an end. The broadcast ended, and the television screen faded into network programming. No one reached for the remote. No one spoke. The applause from Washington disappeared, leaving only the soft hum of the air conditioner and the distant laughter of children outside. The silence felt different now. Not hostile. Not tense. Heavy. Honest. Ethan remained seated. His eyes stayed fixed on the dark television screen long after the interview ended. Around him, family members looked uncertain. Some stared at the floor. Others stared at me. Nobody seemed sure what to do next. The certainty that had filled the reunion earlier was gone. Completely gone. Margaret slowly stood from the sofa. Her movements looked careful. Almost fragile. She took a few steps toward me and stopped. For a moment, it seemed like she might say something immediately. Instead, she lowered her eyes. The room watched. Every person watched. "I was wrong," she said quietly. Nobody interrupted. Nobody looked away. The words hung in the air. Simple words. Difficult words. Margaret swallowed hard. "I judged you before I knew you." Her voice cracked slightly. "And I am sorry." The room remained silent. No dramatic reaction followed. No sudden forgiveness. Just truth. Honest truth. Uncle Robert stood next. He rubbed the back of his neck and exhaled slowly. "We all did." Several relatives nodded. A younger cousin looked embarrassed. Nathan lowered his head. One by one, people seemed to recognize their role in the story that had unfolded. Not because television exposed them. Because reality exposed them. Ethan finally rose from his chair. The room became still again. This was different. Everyone knew it. He walked toward me slowly. No confidence. No pride. No performance. Just a man carrying the weight of his own mistakes. He stopped a few feet away. His eyes looked tired. Older somehow. "Jasmine." The sound of my name felt different coming from him now. He took a breath. "I spent years believing I understood you." He paused. "I did not." Nobody moved. Even the children near the hallway seemed unusually quiet. Ethan looked down briefly before meeting my eyes again. "I stopped listening." His voice remained low. "I stopped seeing you." The words landed harder than any explanation could. Because they were true. The room knew they were true. He knew they were true. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Outside, the backyard lights glowed against the evening darkness. Wind moved gently through the trees. Somewhere beyond the fence, a dog barked once. Life continued normally. Yet inside the house, something had changed forever. A mini hook lingered beneath the moment. Apologies had finally arrived. But apologies alone could not repair everything. Ethan understood that too. "I cannot change what happened," he said. "But I am sorry." No excuses followed. No attempts to shift blame. No effort to explain away his behavior. Just accountability. Real accountability. That mattered more than he probably realized. I studied his face for a moment. The room waited. Every person seemed to hold their breath. Then I nodded once. Not because everything was fixed. Not because years of hurt disappeared. Simply because honesty deserved acknowledgement. Relief moved quietly through the room. Margaret sat back down. Uncle Robert released a breath he seemed to have been holding for minutes. Linda smiled faintly. Nobody celebrated. Nobody treated the moment like a perfect ending. Real life rarely works that way. Trust takes time. Respect takes effort. Understanding takes choice. Yet something important had finally happened. People were seeing each other clearly. Perhaps for the first time. Then someone knocked softly at the front door. The knock at the front door drew every eye in the room. For a second, nobody moved. The evening had already delivered more surprises than anyone expected. Then Nathan walked across the living room and opened the door. A uniformed courier stood outside holding a large presentation case. Soft porch light reflected off the polished black surface. "Delivery for Jasmine Carter," he said. Nathan stepped aside and looked toward me. The room watched as I approached the doorway. The courier smiled politely after confirming my identity. "Congratulations," he said. "This was sent ahead from Washington." I thanked him and accepted the case. The door closed gently behind him. Silence returned once more. Not uncomfortable silence. Curious silence. I carried the case back into the living room and placed it carefully on the coffee table. The polished latches clicked softly when I opened it. Inside rested the award from the ceremony. Crystal. Elegant. Simple. Light from the ceiling reflected through the engraved surface and scattered across the room. Nobody spoke for several moments. Then something unexpected happened. The youngest child in the family stepped forward. She could not have been older than 8. She looked at the award. Then she looked at me. "Did you really help all those students?" she asked. Her voice was innocent. Honest. Free from all the assumptions that had complicated the day. I smiled. "I tried." The little girl considered that answer seriously. Then she nodded. "I want to help people too." A few relatives quietly laughed. Not because the comment was funny. Because it was pure. Because it reminded everyone what actually mattered. The child returned to her parents. The tension in the room eased a little more. Margaret looked toward me. "Those students were lucky." I shook my head gently. "They worked hard." She nodded slowly. This time she listened instead of arguing. Ethan remained standing nearby. He had not tried to defend himself again. He had not tried to change the subject. He simply stayed present. Sometimes that is where accountability begins. Outside, the backyard lights glowed warmly against the darkness. The smell of barbecue still lingered faintly in the air. Someone quietly started cleaning paper plates from the tables. Another relative gathered folding chairs. Life slowly resumed. Yet nothing felt exactly the same. Linda moved beside me and glanced at the award. "You know," she said softly, "they finally saw what was always there." I looked around the room. At the relatives speaking more gently. At the cousins helping clean. At the children running through the hallway. At Ethan standing quietly with thoughts he would carry long after tonight. Then I looked back at the Crystal Award. "Maybe," I said. Linda smiled. The evening continued. Conversations became smaller. More honest. Less performative. No grand speeches followed. No dramatic declarations. Just people choosing to behave differently than they had a few hours earlier. Sometimes that is how real change begins. Not with applause. Not with television cameras. With ordinary choices made after the audience is gone. Later, as guests prepared to leave, Ethan approached one final time. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not ask for reassurance. He simply nodded and said, "Thank you for being better than the way we treated you." Then he stepped back. I watched relatives disappear into the night one car at a time. Porch lights glowed across the neighborhood. The air felt cool against my skin. Inside the house, the Crystal Award reflected a final ribbon of golden light. And for the first time that day, everything was quiet.